And very quickly, the current list price is $2,000 a month in the United States, correct?
The current list price is $1,780 in the United States, and just to correct, the $3 billion was a global figure.
Okay,
for Truvada for PrEP.
So the list price is almost $2,000 in the United States. Why is it $8 in Australia?
This is an EpiPen. It's a device that injects you with adrenaline if you're having a possibly deadly allergic reaction. If you have severe allergies, you basically need it. And if you live in the UK, an EpiPen will cost you the equivalent of $38 US. But if you live in the US, it'll cost you $300. And it's not just the EpiPen. Let's look at 5 of the top-selling prescription drugs in the world. Advair, a brand name asthma inhaler, more expensive in the US.
We pay twice as much for our prescription medicine in the United States as they do in the rest of the world. And why is that? Why do we pay twice as much? Why? Because our government is completely corrupt, and everyone knows it.
I live 50 miles away from Canada, and in many cases, they pay 50% less for the same exact medicine that we buy in Vermont or in America. And we all know the reason why. The power and wealth of the pharmaceutical industry and their 1,300 lobbyists and unlimited sums of money have bought the United States Congress. Let's be clear about it. Today, Mr. Trump, a guy I don't quote very often, he said that pharma gets away with murder. That's what Trump said. He's right.
What we have to do is create new bidding procedures for the drug industry because they're getting away with murder. Pharma has a lot of lobbies, a lot of lobbyists, and a lot of power, and there's very little bidding on drugs. We're the largest buyer of drugs in the world, and yet we don't bid properly, and we're going to start bidding, and we're going to save billions of dollars over a period of time.
All right, so let me just ask you, if you had read out loud what Donald Trump just said, but told you those words came out of the mouth of Bernie Sanders, well, you know what? It would seem believable, right?
Year after year.
Wow. So that, by the way, that is how you win. You don't just oppose the idea of Trump because he's right about some stuff. And listen to what he's saying. 50% less in Canada for drugs.
Lantus, a type of insulin, more expensive in the US. Sovaldi for hepatitis C, yep, costs more in the US. Humira for arthritis, Crestor for cholesterol, more expensive in the US.
That patent has been privatized, despite the fact that the patent is owned by the public.
During a House committee hearing, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called out a Big Pharma CEO to his face. Watch.
Mr. O'Day, you're the CEO of Gilead. Is it true that Gilead made $3 billion in profits from the sales of Truvada in 2018?
$3 billion in revenue.
Oh, yes, in revenue, thank you. And very quickly, the current list price is $2,000 a month in the United States, correct?
The current list price is $1,780 in the United States, and just to correct, the $3 billion was a global figure.
Okay,
for Truvada for PrEP.
So the list price is almost $2,000 in the United States. Why is it $8 in Australia?
Truvada still has patent protection in the United States, and in the rest of the world it is generic. I can't comment on the price in Australia of the generic medicines, but it is generically available in other parts of the world and will be generically available in the United States as of September in 2020, based upon Gilead agreeing to support generic entries 1 year
So
early.
I think it's important that we notice here that we, the public, we, the people, developed this drug, we paid for this drug, we led and developed all of the grounding patents to create PrEP, and then that patent has been privatized, despite the fact that the patent is owned by the public. We refuse to enforce it. There's no reason this should be $2,000 a month. People are dying because of it, and there's no enforceable reason for it. We own the core intellectual property for it, and as a result, people are dying for no reason.
Join the Democrats. So that was the Bernie Sanders bill to allow for the importation of prescription drugs into the United States from Canada. Why do you pass a law to make it illegal? 12 Republicans? Yep. 12 Republicans join them. You know who's on board for this? Ted Cruz.
Oh, my God.
So it's good enough for Bernie Sanders, and it's good enough for Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz. Rand Paul also voted for this. John McCain also voted for this. So I'm like, oh, this is going to pass. This is going to be great. Look at Bernie's a real leader. He's not a fairy duster. He's such a good legislator. He knows how to get Ted Cruz to go along with him. Guess who didn't go along with him? The corporate pig Democrats. Guys like, well, Cory Booker. He voted against it. And let me tell you something. When Cory Booker, that corporate pig... Okay, here's Cory Booker with Jake Tapper.
Let me ask you about drugs, because that's obviously an important part of healthcare. And you know Bernie Sanders was very critical of you and 12 other Democrats for voting against a bill that would have allowed the importation of drugs from Canada. And I know that you've answered as to why you voted that way. But he was very harsh. He said you and the other Democrats lacked the guts to stand up to the pharmaceutical industry.
Remember this, Cory Booker? Big Pharma paid me $267,000, so I voted against lowering drug costs. Remember he did that?
Senator Cory Booker.
Abilify is more than 6 times as much in the United States as it is in Canada. Are you proud of your country? Are you proud of your American corporations who Americans harder? The idea to import drugs from Canada, 72% of Americans support it. They're not their own people. The Democrats' people are Big Pharma and Wall Street. And that's why we're in the pickle we're in. And that's why you can't let up the heat on the Democrats, because we got to get rid of these corporate if we're going to make any progress. When he voted against this, he guaranteed poor people will die. So what Cory Booker is saying to you when he does that, he's liberal who gives. Well, you know what I say to Cory Booker? No, Cory, because I'm telling everybody about it every time I'm on TYT or I'm on the Pacifica radio or I'm on anywhere doing anything. I'm reminding people that you are a garbage person.
And if a politician won't enable this type of corruption, like Bernie Sanders, he should have been the Democratic nominee in 2016. The Democratic National Committee and the media conspired to steal the primary from him. It wasn't Russia. Russia didn't hack our election in 2016. It was the Democratic National Committee and the media stealing the primary from Bernie. This cartoon was in a newspaper 2 weekends ago. Oh, Ocasio-Cortez, she's destroying the Democratic Party by telling them, go further to the left. Give the American people left-leaning ideas like cheaper prescription drugs, cheaper college, higher minimum wage, stop the endless wars overseas, do something about climate change. All of these ideas AOC has fundamentally are pretty decent ideas, but the media smears her. Not because she's un-American, but because she's willing to stand up to the corruption in Washington, D.C. and expose the crazy situation of a patented drug being $1,700 in the United States and $8 in Australia.
For no reason. He developed this drug. Thank you very much.
Time has expired. All right. Again, AOC is doing what every other person in Congress should be doing, but they aren't, at least not to the degree that AOC has been doing it.
Republicans are for this. 72% of America is for it. And the Democrats turn their back on their own people. They're not their own people. The Democrats' people are Big Pharma and Wall Street. And that's why we're in the pickle we're in.
So here's an unsurprising chart. Americans spend more on prescription drugs than anyone else in the world. Why? The first thing you have to understand is that in the US, drugs get to patients differently than almost everywhere else. Let's look at that popular hepatitis C drug, Sovaldi. In 2014, Sovaldi became the first drug to completely cure hepatitis C. Here's how it got to market in, for example, the UK. First, a government agency had to decide that Sovaldi was safe and that it actually worked. Then it was evaluated by a regulatory agency to see if it was worthwhile. Are there too many side effects? Is there already a similar drug? Is there a cheaper option? Sovaldi was deemed worthwhile. Next, they negotiated the price. In the UK, the government buys the stock of medicine for the country. That means they're usually able to get a lower rate, kind of like a bulk discount, which keeps prescription drugs cheaper for UK citizens. In almost every developed country besides the US, this is what the system looks like. Safety evaluation, assessment of whether the country needs it, price negotiations, sold to patients. Now let's look at the system in the United States. First, the drug is evaluated for safety, but that's it. If it's safe, they can sell it, end of story. Drugs are sold by the drug companies to patients, usually through insurance. And since the US system lets them sell it for any price, Gilead, the company that makes Sovaldi, charged Americans more for it. When it first came to market, the entire treatment cost $84,000 in the US. In the UK, just about $58,000 US dollars. That's still a lot of money, but it's a full 30% less. So it seems like the UK has the better system, right? Well, it's complicated. These photos are from protests in the US against the high price of EpiPens. And these are photos from protests in the UK over the lack of access to a cystic fibrosis drug called Orkambi. That's because when there's a committee that determines whether a new drug is worthwhile, sometimes they say no. And when they negotiate the price, sometimes they don't come to an agreement and hit a standoff. That's what's happening with Orkambi. Both systems require trade-offs. Regulated drug markets tend to make drugs more affordable, but some drugs are completely unavailable. And while the US has more drugs technically available, they're often too expensive to actually afford. Americans without insurance are the most likely to skip medication because of the cost. Even Americans with insurance are second. But the commonality between these two systems is the drug companies. Developing new drug products isn't cheap, and they're for-profit businesses. If Gilead didn't think that researching and developing a hepatitis C cure would make them money in the end, they might not have. And with these regulated markets keeping costs down, the only place drug companies can really make their money is, you guessed it, the US. Americans are essentially subsidizing the cost of drugs for the rest of the world. In other words, a big part of why prescription drugs are more expensive in the US is because they're cheaper everywhere else.